Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for our 5-minute Bible study of the day. Today we're in Exodus chapter 25, and as always, there's a link down in the description where you can download this PDF that you're about to see up on the screen that has all of the notes on it. When did the events of Exodus chapter 25 take place? Well, the Israelites got out of slavery in Egypt about 1491 BC. These events would have taken place about 3 to 4 months after that, and we know that based on Exodus chapter 19 and verse 1. In terms of our main characters, we had some variety in the last chapter, but now we're just back to two main characters, Moses and God. They are having a conversation on top of Mount Sinai for 40 days. It's a very long conversation in which God was giving the laws and his commands to Moses so that he could communicate those laws and commands to the Israelite people, because these were the laws that God wanted his people to live by to make them a distinct nation. In terms of our map, we are still encamped around Mount Sinai, at least the Israelites were at this point, and I've included the traditional location of Mount Sinai on the map on the PDF. Moving on into our outline, in verses 1 through 9, there's a contribution that's taken up for something called the tabernacle. The tabernacle is kind of a big deal. It basically consumes the rest of the book of Exodus as far as the details of how it was supposed to be built and who built it and all the sacrifices that were supposed to be offered there. But we'll talk about that in the upcoming chapters. Right now, we're just going to talk about the very first part of the tabernacle's construction and how the materials were gathered. So verses 1 through 9, a contribution for the tabernacle. God told Moses to take up a contribution, a voluntary contribution from the people, and he was to collect quite a few things: gold, silver, bronze, yarn, linen, goat hair, tanned goat skins, acacia wood, oil, spices for incense, and precious stones. And these items were going to be used to create a tabernacle, which is basically just a tent, but this was going to be a special tent because it was going to be the place where God's presence would dwell among his people as they were journeying through the wilderness on the way to the promised land. God was going to show Moses the pattern by which all of the tabernacle and the things that went inside of it were supposed to be built. One of the things that was going to go in the tabernacle was the Ark of the Covenant. And even if you've never read the Bible before, you probably heard of the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe if you watched Indiana Jones, you've heard about it. I don't think I've ever actually watched that whole movie. I just catch snippets of it, on TV or whatever. I don't think I've actually sat down and watched the entire thing. But anyway, verses 10 through 22 describe instructions for building the Ark of the Covenant. So this is its origin story. Moses was told to build an ark from acacia wood. The ark was supposed to be 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits tall. Now, if you don't know, a cubit is about 1.5 feet, 18 inches, about 0.46 or a half of a meter for those living outside of the United States. And the entire ark was supposed to be covered over with gold when it was finished. The ark was to be carried using poles that strung through rings, golden rings that were attached to the feet of the ark. Now, on top of the ark, Moses was supposed to make something called a mercy seat. It was made out of gold, and there were 2 images of 2 angels on either side of this mercy seat, and their wings stretched out over the top of the ark, and they met in the middle. And this mercy seat was special because this was the place where God was going to speak to Moses. Something else that was going to go into the tabernacle was the golden table for the bread of the presence, and its dimensions are described in verses 23 through 30. Moses was supposed to build this golden table, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits tall. And on near the legs of this table, there were supposed to be rings, like with the Ark of the Covenant, and it was to be carried on poles of acacia wood that were overlaid with gold. And this table was special because it was going to be used to hold something called the bread of the presence. And then finally, in verses 31 through 40, we have instructions for building the golden lampstand. So the last thing that God told Moses to build in Exodus chapter 25 was a lampstand made out of pure gold. It was to have 6 branches, 3 on each side, and it was each of those branches protruded from a center column, and it was to be decorated with golden flowers. So the lampstand held 7 lamps total that were designed to light the tabernacle, which would have been important because the priests would have had to go in there and work, and it was a tent, so it would have been pretty dark. And so that is Exodus chapter 25. We have just begun our discussions on the tabernacle. We're going to talk about that much more in the chapters to come. Let's talk about an application before we finish up. Rather than forcing the Israelites to contribute the materials for the tabernacle, notice that God asked them to give voluntarily. Nobody was compelled to do this. Now, did God need their contributions to accomplish his will? Well, of course, the answer is no. God doesn't need anything, but he did give them an opportunity to be a part of his work. And this pattern is repeated in the New Testament as well. The apostles collected voluntary donations for those who wanted to help the church spread in the early days. You can read about that in Acts chapter 2 and the chapters immediately following that. God doesn't need our money to advance the gospel and to help the needy, but he gives us the privilege of participating with him. Isn't it incredible that God invites us to help, even though he doesn't need our help? It's kind of like a father who allows his son to help him do something, even though he could have done it maybe better, even faster on his own. He's given us a place. He's given us a role in this world, and we should be privileged to carry out that role and to accept that opportunity rather than grumbling about it or whining about it as sometimes we do.